This semester, I'd love to talk to you afterwards. There was a wallet left out on the floor in the lobby. If your name is Kelly, we have your wallet. You can get it now. She may not even be in here. She could be in a CG. But if your name is Kelly and you're in here, your wallet will be there. And you can get it now or you can wait till afterwards. It's up to you. But if she's not in here, none of that mattered. But anyways, I feel like every time I get up here and preach over the last 6 months or so, that I really, I feel like I owe you guys an update on my wife. She's pregnant, in case you didn't know. My wife, Tori, and she's now 35 weeks pregnant. And so she is ready to pop. And so she's 5 weeks from yesterday is our due date. And actually, we had a doctor's appointment today that it might be a week early. And so possibly 4 weeks, my life's going to change forever. And so I'm excited and terrified. And so as we're getting close, I've been trying to warm up my dad jokes a little bit. And so I'm hoping that this joke ends like my wife's pregnancy with a good delivery. Yeah, the first service was way better than you guys. They laughed at that, but that's okay. Sorry about that. But we're going to be continuing our series, What Am I Doing Here Tonight? And then not this Sunday because of the Super Bowl. If you come, you'll be alone. But the next Sunday, we'll be starting our new series called Loveology. And we're going to be talking about dating, relationships, engagement, marriage, sex, singleness, the whole thing. And so we'll dive into that in a couple weeks. But tonight, we'll be talking and continuing this series, What Am I Doing Here? But before we dive in, a few weeks ago, I took a midday trip to Target. I needed to pick up a couple things. And a key detail, I was driving my wife's car that day. And so I was going to Target, and I go in, get a couple things that I needed, and I'm walking out. And I walk out, and I see my wife's car, and I kind of I'm on my phone, and so I'm kind of on my phone, and I'm going to send a text back. And so I look up, I see my car, okay, cool, I keep walking, and then I walk up to the car door, and I go to, with confidence to open my car door, and I open the door, and then I hear it gets pulled shut. And I was like, well, that's weird, because that's my car. And it turns out I look up, and I lock eyes with a terrified woman. You've heard the phrase deer in the headlights. Like, she was the absolute epitome of that phrase in that moment. Like, her eyes were literally about to explode out of her head. And I realized, I had a moment, I was like, oh, not my car. And so I'm almost positive that she peed her pants. And so I'm looking at her, and I'm talking to her, she pulled it shut. Really quick reaction, by the way, which is good on her. I'm looking at it and get tased or pepper sprayed. And so she pulls it shut, and I'm staring at her, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm saying this loud so she could hear me. I was like, I am so sorry. I'm not a perv. I was just here to buy a couple of things. What had happened was, I had parked here, and she had parked here, and she was driving essentially the same car that my wife drives, same color. They were both clean because I just gotten her car washed. And so she parked right before me, and they basically the same car. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Look, I'm parked right there. Watch me walk over here. And I'm talking to her like this. And so I'm like, I'm getting in my car, same one, see? Yeah. And so I get in my car, and I look at her one more time through the windows, just to I'm so sorry. And I finally, she kind of is like, it's okay, I can understand. But she was also like, can you leave, please? And so she nods her head, terrified. Again, I'm pretty sure she peed her pants. And so I knew I had scared her really badly, and I felt horrible. I got in my car, and I was like, oh my, I just did that. And so all that to say, the reason why I share this is because I had completely fooled myself into thinking that I was doing the right thing and that I was getting in the right car. I was confident, but I was seriously mistaken. I was convinced that it was my car, but I fooled myself. And I think that for a lot of Christians, for a lot of believers, a lot of people that say that they follow Jesus, when it comes to being light in this world, which is what we're going to talk about tonight in Matthew 5, when it comes to being lights in this world, the way that Jesus has called us to be, if we're not careful, we can fool ourselves. We believe that we're doing the right thing, and we're being lights, But sometimes the truth could be that we may actually not be living it like we think we are. We've mistaken what it means to be a light. And the reality is that we might even be hiding our light or keeping it dim or only showing it at church or only showing it when it's comfortable and living in darkness, maybe even living in darkness behind closed doors, kind of keeping it as dim as possible. And I think that maybe some of us have possibly, like I have before, fooled myself into thinking that we're truly living out the mission of God to be a light. And that was what I did for many years, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But tonight, as we continue looking at this passage in Matthew chapter 5, where Travis started last week, we're going to talk about what it's actually supposed to look like to be a light for Christ in this dark world. And some of us, I know, are already doing that. And some of us, we might be struggling a little bit. Some of us might have ourselves fooled into thinking that we're doing something, but we're not. That we're opening the right door, but we're not. Our light's hidden, but we fool ourselves into thinking that it's shining bright because we maybe pray a few times a week or we go to church. And here's the thing. I bring this up because what I don't want for myself, for any of you, for my daughter, Hallie, when she's born and as she starts to grow up, is that I don't want any of us to miss out on the fulfillment and the peace and the purpose and the joy of being the light that Jesus calls us. I don't want us to miss it. And so all of us, we've got to answer the question, do I really understand what being a light is? When Jesus says you are the light, am I being that light? And then my hope for some of us is that maybe tonight, that maybe you would receive the light of Jesus for the first time, that you'll realize that the darkness doesn't have to reign in your life, that Jesus can light it up when you think that maybe he couldn't, that Jesus can actually fill the darkest places in your life with light. And so first, I want us to read Matthew 5, verses 13 through 16. And so we'll see the verse that Travis preached on last week about salt, and then we'll focus on what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is light. So starting in verse 13, it says, Jesus talking to his disciples, "You are the light, you are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who's in heaven." And so the first thing tonight that we're going to see is that to be a light is to be on fire. To be a light is to be on fire. So in verse 14, we see that Jesus literally says, he says, "You are the light." Like that's us. And so he's saying like, this is something that we are. If you are in him, if you're following Jesus, and if you surrender your life to Jesus, you are the light. So when we're saved by Christ, we become lights in this dark world. And we're not just saved to carry on with our lives however we see fit. Like it'd be nice if if you register for a class at school, at tech, or wherever you go, and like it'd be nice if you could register and then you could make up the work that you do and you could determine what your assignments are and when they're due and stuff like that. Like that would be awesome if it was like that. Maybe I would possibly graduate one day if that's how it was. But the thing is that it's not like that. And it's the same thing is that when you surrender your life to Jesus, Jesus is our leader, he's our teacher, he's our Father, and he gives us this assignment, this designation. He designates to us the role of being a light. And this is good news for us. But for a Christian to be a light, it's really only going to happen if you are on fire for the Lord. And that's why I say to be a light is to be on fire. And so I ask the question, are you and am I doing everything that I can to add fuel to that fire for the Lord in my life? Because here's the hard truth is that when it comes to being on fire and being a light, you cannot be a light if you're not following Jesus. We see in John 8:12, again, Jesus is speaking. He says, again, Jesus spoke to them saying, "I am the light of the world." So what's really cool about that is that Jesus says, "I am the light," and he also says that you are the light. So we're in unison with Jesus. But then he says, "Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." And so the reality is that for so many of us, we don't really have a light that shows because we've stopped following Jesus in every area of our life. Because you notice he says, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says, "Whoever follows me will have the light of life." Follows me. Key words there. And so you're not going to be on fire for Jesus if you're not following him. Like I can't be on fire for Jesus if I'm not following him. And we're not going to be on fire for Jesus if we're not pursuing him and chasing him. And so if you're a Christian and you're asking yourself the question, man, how can I let my light shine brighter? And if I ask myself that question, I feel like we should pull a total Jesus move and respond to a question with a question and say, am I doing everything that I can to chase after Jesus? Am I doing everything that I can to chase after Jesus, to follow Jesus? I remember when I was a junior in high school, I felt so far from God, which, I was a kid who grew up in church, and I believed in God, and I believed that I had a faith in Jesus, but I was in this period of life, this is like 2011, 2012 for me, and I felt so far from God. But I had this deep desire, like I wanted to be on fire. I wanted to follow him, but I felt like I couldn't. I wanted to be closer to God, and I wanted to be a light, but I wasn't. My life did not reflect that at all. I felt numb and dark and almost like a useless Christian. I felt like a light that had no purpose because I wasn't shining it. And the truth is that what had happened was my complacent Christianity had kind of finally caught up with me, and I was burnt out because of it. For years, like my idea of being a light or following Jesus was just kind of showing up to church and maybe praying during the week when I had a test and praying for this girl that I liked that God would let me date her. And that was like my idea of following Jesus. And it worked for a while, but it caught up to me. And I was burnt out. It led to me being burnt out and not a light. And halfway through my junior year in high school, Travis, the college pastor here, he actually came in, and this is in the DFW area, he came in to be the youth pastor at the church that I was going to. That's how Travis and I know each other from way back when. But he came in to be the youth pastor, and he had a couple of guys and myself over to their apartment, him and his wife's apartment, and I remember him asking me, he kind of knew that I was like the church kid, like my dad was on the search committee that brought him to the church, and so he had this idea of, this is this guy's probably pretty solid. And so he asked me, he was like, man, it's like, what's God been doing in your life? And I was like, well, nothing really. I was like, I haven't felt God in quite some time, and I'm like pretty numb. Like I feel like I don't really, I'm just like burnt out. And I remember him asking me if there was something in the way. And I didn't answer him at the time. I was like, I don't know, I don't think so. And I realized in that moment that I was not a light, that I wasn't on fire for God. Not that just because I wasn't pursuing him, because I wasn't, and I wasn't chasing him, but what happened was my life had become, in that complacency, my life had become filled with the darkness of sin. And I've shared about it here before, but I had this addiction to pornography that was plaguing me. So I had this really dark and secret sin. So I was filled with darkness of the sin in my life. And also I was really complacent. I was just going to church and putting up the front that I had it all together. And so this complacency and this sin filled me with a lot of darkness. And so I was there and I was burnt out and I wasn't chasing God and I felt numb. And I was in this place where I was like, man, I don't know what to do. And I remember going to him and about a week later and sharing that with him. And from that moment on, as I had some accountability and some encouragement, and I opened up and was transparent, I remember that I knew that my life was filled with the darkness of sin and complacency, but I realized that I was actually the one who needed the light the most. Before I could be on fire for God once again, like I needed him to flood my heart. I needed Jesus to consume me. I needed his light to shine into the dark places in my life before I could be the light. And so here's the thing. You cannot be a light if you're not consumed with light. There's a song that we sing here at the Way called God of Revival. We sang it many times last semester. And the lyrics, they say, because there's no prison wall you can't break through, no mountain you can't move. All things are possible. No broken you can't raise, no soul you can't save. All things are possible. The darkest night, you can light it up. You can light it up. And so no matter how dark it may feel in your soul or how dark of a place that you might find yourself in, like Jesus can shine into your heart and change everything in a moment like he did for me. And when Jesus shines into your heart, you're going to begin to be consumed by him. And as the light of Jesus consumes you, it's going to flow out of you. And so we've got to ask ourselves, man, am I consumed with Jesus? I mean, seriously, like, let's just get real and honest with ourselves here for a second. Every believer in the room, is my heart and my life consumed with Jesus? Or is there areas that I'm holding back? Is there areas that I haven't let him in? Is there areas of darkness that I'm keeping to myself? Have I let him in every area of my life? Have I let him consume me to the point that he's flowing out of me and I'm being this light that Jesus calls us here? Because this is what Jesus is talking about. It's something that he calls us. It's what we are in Christ, but we cannot be that if we are not consumed by it. So to be a light, it's to be consumed by the fire of Jesus. Is this you? Is this me? Because if we want to be lights in this world, like this passage in Matthew is saying, where Jesus is preaching, and I want us to imagine for a second, think that maybe we're back here, and this is speaking to us, but we're actually here, and we are the disciples, and Jesus is standing in front of you, and he says, listen, you are the light of the world. Like Jesus is standing right in front of your face, and you're a disciple, and he says, you are the light of the world. Man, what a call, what a responsibility, but man, that can't happen if we're not asking Jesus to consume every area of our lives. And so to be a light is to be on fire. Am I on fire for God? And I know that as Christians, we go through dry seasons and we have struggles still. But within that, am I doing everything that I can to pursue him? Am I doing everything that I can to ask him to consume every area of my life? Do I have a desire to be on fire for God? Am I asking God for that desire? The second thing that we see tonight is that a lamp is only useful when placed correctly. In verse 15, Jesus said, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. And I feel like the disciples here were like, oh, thanks, Jesus, like, obviously. But then he's like, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. And the reason why Jesus was saying this is it's funny, like, we can hear that and we can go, oh, like, that seems pretty obvious, but we struggle with this. The disciples struggle with this, with backing off. When it was time to shine, kind of just stepping back. When there was somewhere that needed light, we kind of step back. When someone in our life is in a dark place and we have an opportunity to share, to shine, we kind of step back. So the thing is, like, if you take a lamp, right? If I took a table lamp and like my wife, she came home and she bought a new lamp and I took it and I turned it on and then I go and I set it in the corner behind the chair. It's useless, right? She just wasted money on a lamp. You gotta put it on a stand. It's got to be on display. Jesus calls us light, and then he calls us to be and go certain places, to be around and in front of certain people to show that light. So many Christians that are called light, like that's your identity, but we're hiding it. We're covering it. We're shining it in places not seen by others. We're keeping it dim. And please don't get me wrong. It's amazing if you have a personal relationship with Jesus. Part of that is reading your Bible and praying alone and doing the things like a relationship with Christ behind closed doors that people don't see. But also, are you being a light outside of those four walls? Are you being a light outside of the church building? And let's be honest, for most people, like if that light isn't shining publicly, it may not be shining privately either. Because usually, if a person is spending a lot of time with Jesus alone, there's going to be a lot of Jesus shining out of them in front of others. Usually, what you do the most privately is what's going to come out publicly. I believe that Jesus has specific places and people that he calls each of us to go and be lights, but so many of us, we struggle and we avoid that call of Jesus on their life, and I know I did that for a long time. Still struggle with it sometimes, man, stepping back when I know that I need to step in. So you got to ask the question, man, do I actually want to be a light, a useful light? And I believe that for many people in this room, the answer is yes, and I see that. And maybe for some, the prayer that we need to start praying is, Lord, would you grow my desire for you? God, would you give me a greater desire for you and your plans for my life? Because without this desire, it's going to be difficult for you to ever go where he calls you. It's going to be difficult to be a light where he calls you to be a light if you don't really desire it. Sometimes we just need God to give us that desire. We need to be praying for that in our own lives. Because I really do believe that every single one of us has a specific place where we can shine the brightest. And I believe that if we're following Jesus, if you're chasing after Jesus and you are that light, then you're going to be placed exactly where you need to be effective. So am I where God wants me to be? If you're chasing after Jesus and pursuing him, with great desire, the answer to that question is going to be yes. It may not always feel like it, but if you are pursuing Jesus, then you will be where you are supposed to be, and he will use the light in your life that he's given you. There's a couple, a married couple, about my age, like mid-20s, and their names were Zach and Becca Calderon. And they're Zach's from the Lubbock area. I'm not sure about Becca, but I've known them since I've been in Lubbock the last 5 years or so. And I remember meeting them before I think they were ever even dating. And since the beginning, like they are such lights for the Lord. Just the way that they love on people, the way they talk to people, the way that they serve in their church. They both have a passion for ministry. Like they love Jesus, and it's extremely evident, and I love to see it. And they are, now that they're married and they're pursuing Jesus together, he has placed them and called them to exactly where they need to be. And it was something that was never on their mind, but their light is actually going to be the most useful for the next couple of years in Thailand. They are right now in Wisconsin. They're training to go and be overseas. And in Thailand, they're going to, pretty soon as they are applying for their visas, they're going to be there working out of a coffee shop. And they're going to be helping women and children coming out of sex trafficking. And they're going to be sharing the gospel with them and helping them recover as they go back into society. And so like, as they were pursuing Jesus, he just placed this call in their life. And he said, this is where I need you to go. This is where you're going to go be a light. And I mean, they could ignore this call on their life, but then they wouldn't be where God wants them to be. And this all came for them because they simply gave God their yes and asked him, God, where do you want me to go? God, lead me where you want me to go. And so for us, like, have we and have I given my yes to God yesterday, today, and tomorrow? Does God have your yes? As a light, if you're a believer, does God have your yes? Have you asked God to lead you and place you where he wants you to be? Because I believe that every person that comes to Jesus and surrenders their life will be restored and redeemed and given this light to shine, and you will have a purpose and a plan in this life, in this world. You will know, not always clearly, but you will know the answer to what am I doing here? It's to be a light for Jesus. Whether you surrender your life to Jesus tonight for the first time or you've already done that, he has a purpose. And so will you start to pray, God, place me exactly where you want me so that my light can be most useful. The next thing that we're going to see tonight is this: the darkest places need the most light. And this may seem like an obvious statement, but again, so many Christians, we struggle with this, only letting our light be seen inside of a church building or inside of a place that's most comfortable. And then after church on Sundays, well, it's Thursday this week, but after church on Sundays or whatever day you go, then Monday through Saturday outside of the church, it's kind of like, well, I'll just dim that down. I'll use the dim setting and turn it down to a 1 instead of a 10 like it was when I was at church and I had my hands up. And so the reality is, though, is that nobody takes a lamp, using that analogy again, and takes it outside at noon in the middle of the day and turns it on. Like, no, like you take that lamp and you go and you put it in the room in the house that doesn't have windows that needs light the most. Because that's the place where the light is most needed. And for us, like, if we are the light, we got to ask the question, in my life and in my world, in my circle, where is the light most needed? Who in my life needs the light the most? Because what are the places where we tend to step back, like I was saying earlier, where we tend to kind of dim the light or hide our faith, are actually the places where you need to show it the most? Like at the dinner table with friends or family, the classroom that you're in multiple days a week, or the lab, or the workplace, or your friend hangouts, or the apartment with your roommates that you don't really know, but you know they're not really living a life that's that great right now. They have a lot of darkness in their life, or maybe it's a dorm room or someone down the hallway. Like, what are the places where we kind of keep it to ourselves the most is actually where it needs to shine the most. Because the reality is, like, I know most people in the room are students at Texas Tech or LCU, or you are a college student somewhere, most likely Tech, and we all know that there's a lot of really great things about Tech and about Lubbock, a lot of great things that happen on a college campus, but there's also a lot of darkness. There's a lot of darkness in a lot of different ways. There's so many things that students are wrestling with and dealing with and falling into and trying to come out of and stuck, and there's so much darkness, and even in our own lives, we've probably experienced that. In fact, like a college campus can probably be one of the darkest places. And if you're a student there and a believer, like Jesus, he's called you and placed you there for a reason. He's saying, like, you are the light, and I have you placed here in one of the darkest places to shine. And I believe this is the call right here for the college student, the Texas Tech student, and really any campus around the country. You have an opportunity to shine the light of Jesus in a place where darkness usually thrives the most. And I saw this quote from a Christian theologian in the 1700s. One of these old guys, hundreds of years ago, said some really good things. And his name is John Wesley. And one of the quotes that he said is, "If I had 300 men who feared nothing but God, hated nothing but sin, and were determined to know nothing among men but Jesus Christ and Him crucified, I would set the world on fire." And he said that, and I don't know who he was preaching to or who was around him at the time in the 1700s, but I thought, man, like, what if we take that quote and we apply it to just the believers from the group of people here at the Way tonight and the people that are around us in the CGs right now? So let's reword this. What if there were 300 college students from the Way who were completely sold out for Christ, hated sin and darkness, loved people, were determined to know and preach nothing but Jesus everywhere they go? Man, I believe that we could set the college campuses of Lubbock on fire with the light of Jesus like we've never seen before. And this is not like a cliche thing, like a motivational pump you up. I mean, it is encouraging, but I really believe this, that actually that a group of Christians could be on fire for Jesus and bring light to Texas Tech and to other universities in the area like we've never seen before. I really believe that. I really, really believe that if you are a believer, that God has placed that call on your life. And so we've got to ask Jesus to give us His eyes to see the darkness where it may not be so evident to us. We've got to ask Jesus to give us the boldness and the fire to be the lights that He's called us to be at the campus of Texas Tech in the city of Lubbock. Man, will you answer that call to be the light in the places that need it the most? And maybe you just need the eyes to see it, and maybe your prayer is, God, would you help me to see the darkness around me? Would you help me to see the people around me that need you the most, God? And I don't know who it could be. Maybe for each and every single one of us, if you're a believer, maybe there's just one person in your life. God, I know that person is in darkness. Would you help me to be a light to him? There's just one person in your life that needs the light of Jesus, and you know it. Would you pray for the boldness to do that, to go to them, to be that light, to be that encouragement, to point them to Jesus? Just one person. There was a guy last semester, and I was meeting with him in a coffee shop, and he had come to the Way a couple of times, and he was just sharing about, he was very not church. Like, he did not grow up in church. Actually kind of grew up more agnostic most of his life. His parents didn't go to church, and so completely new to all of this. But he had been hanging around a couple of people here at the Way, and he saw the light of Jesus in their life, and he kept using the word like vibe. He was like, man, I don't know where they get that vibe. And I was like, well, that's the Holy Spirit, but you don't know, that's okay. And but the vibe was his word. He's like, man, I want that vibe. Like, what is that? How do they have that? And he was just saying all these things about him, and it's because I knew the people that he was talking about, and these people are people that live for Jesus, man. The light of Jesus is evident in every single place that they go, the people they're around. Like, these people are lights for Jesus, and they had impacted this guy, and he was like, man, how do I get that? And I remember just in that moment, and it was nothing that I was doing. It was just, I felt like the love of Jesus and the light just flowing out of me because of some other people that he had seen. And I started to share the gospel with them and how Jesus could actually meet him right where he's at in this chair in the coffee shop, and that Jesus could light up his life and change him forever if he would surrender to him. And he prayed right there and accepted Jesus. And I remember just seeing the light consume him in that moment. Like, God lit up his life right there, and I believe that Jesus can do that tonight in your life. If you're here and you're in this room and maybe you're that person and you've seen it, but you're like, man, I don't know how to get it. If you will experience the salvation that Jesus offers on the cross to you, he will change your life forever. That no matter how much darkness is in your life, how much uncertainty is in your life, how many mistakes that you've made, that Jesus can give you this light and change you forever. And I believe that just like for that guy in the coffee shop, that could be you. And I also believe that every believer in the room, that God can actually use you in this way. Like, if you're a believer, that you can actually be a light in someone's life. There are people in darkness all around you that need the light. And so will you be that light that Jesus says you are? Like, this is your identity. This is your call. You can impact for the kingdom of God. The call of Jesus for a believer is not to become something, but to be who you already are in him. And the final point tonight is this: the purpose of being the light is to help lost people find their way. In verse 16, Jesus says, "In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." And so Jesus is saying, listen, I've given you this light for a purpose. I've given you this light because others need to see it. And it's not about you, it's not about me, it's not so that I can get the glory, it's so that Jesus can get the glory. He's given us a light so that we can point other people to him. There's a purpose in that light. There's a reason why he calls us light, is to go and shine before others. He's saying, I actually want people to see your works, but not for selfish gain or fame or anything like that. It's so that they would see Jesus. So that we would be like a lighthouse in the storm, right? If you go and you see a lighthouse, my mom is obsessed with lighthouses. She has all these little things in the house, anyways, random. But lighthouses, the whole purpose of a lighthouse is not just so that it looks cool. When there's actually a storm and when it's dark, the lighthouse turns on and it keeps ships from wrecking. It lets ships know if there's dangerous shorelines ahead. It keeps ships guided, and it guides them through the storm. And that's what we are supposed to be in people's lives. Jesus is saying, you are a lighthouse, and people are in dark storms in their lives, and you have that opportunity to be the one to point them to me. And that's our purpose. Travis was, as we were studying this message, he had shared about a time in college. He remembered being asked, I guess by a professor, what would you do if you were a billionaire? And his answer at the time in college when he was 18, 19 years old was go around preaching the gospel around the world for free. And he said that was his answer, and he just had to stop and go man, is that passion, is that desire, is it still there? Is that still true for me? That if I had everything that I could ever need for the rest of my life, what would I do? Would it really be to go and be a light everywhere around the world that he possibly could be? And man, for us, is that our heart's desire? That with everything in me, that I would be a light for Jesus. That I would fulfill that purpose that God has given me to help lost people find their way. Another thing that I think that we can reflect on for a second is this question: if God came to you right now and said, all of your prayers are going to be answered tonight. He came to me, which they came to Trevor, and he's like, Trevor, right now in 10 minutes, every prayer that you've prayed in the last 2 weeks is going to be answered immediately. Would anyone new be in the kingdom of God? Every prayer that you've prayed in the last 2 weeks, if it was answered right now, would someone new know Jesus? Would somebody new experience the light of Jesus? And I ask that question, man, because it reveals what's on our minds. It reveals what we focus on. And man, in my own prayer life, am I fulfilling that purpose? Am I trying to seek out the lost and point them to Jesus? I hear that and I ask myself, man, would that be true for me? If my prayers were answered, would someone be lost be found? We want to be useful, and every believer, we've got to ask the question, what am I doing here? And the answer to that question is you're here to be a light for Jesus. You are here to bring people to Jesus. Our purpose is to help lost people find their way, and I've seen this happening at the Way. Last semester, there was a couple that was coming every week. The girl, she had kind of been burned by the church a lot. And the guy had grown up atheist and had recently become an agnostic, and so he kind of believed in God but wasn't sure about who God was. And they were coming, and they were getting plugged in, and they were hearing the messages, and they were in the community groups, and people were pouring into them. And she ended up recommitting her faith and getting baptized. And then now he's actually on a path to faith in Jesus. God has been working in his life, and it all happened because somebody was a light to them. People were lights to them. They were being pointed towards Jesus. And that's happening all around us. Man, am I a part of that? Am I pointing people to Jesus? Are we pointing people to Jesus? As I shared at the beginning tonight about opening the wrong car door, I realized, one, that I'm an idiot, and also I realized when I opened that door and I saw the terrified eyes of that woman, I had it was like everything slowed down. And I had like this light bulb moment where it was like, this is not my car. And I had this light bulb moment, and I realized what I had done. And I think, man, when we read this passage from Jesus, like we've got to have a light bulb moment. I think what Jesus is saying here is, listen, like I've come, and through faith in me, I've given you a light. This is your identity through my death and resurrection, and I've allowed that light to be turned on. Will you walk like it's turned on? But I think some of us, man, we're struggling, and it's like it's dimmed or it's turned off. Some of us, we've turned it off, but we fooled ourselves into thinking otherwise. But Jesus is saying, like, I've given you this light to let it shine. Will you just be what I say that you are? Travis was talking to a student after the first service, and through the conversation was kind of gathering that this student was just like, I just feel like I have to do more. Like, I need to do something. Like, I feel like I'm always trying to do stuff. And when it comes to being a disciple or a follower of Jesus, like, it's not just about doing more stuff. It's just being who Jesus says that you are. It's just being what you're called to be, a light. I've offered you a light. Will you just be that light? But I also know that for some people that maybe up until this point, like you've always rejected it, and you've actually never experienced this. That you've actually never surrendered your life to Jesus. And tonight, I believe that this is your moment to take hold of that and surrender your life to Jesus. And I was thinking, like, man, I know, like, 2020, terrible year. Some of you are upset that I even said 2020, but 2021, like, it's not looking much better. But what if it can actually be the best year of your life? Because regardless of what happens in the world, because in 2021, that was the year that Jesus turned the lights on in your life. Like, what if 2021 was the year that you started to follow Jesus, that you surrendered your life to Jesus, and he changed you forever for all of eternity in a moment right now that he redeemed you where you sit? Like, what if that was what you remember about this year? And maybe you've had a faith in Jesus, and if that's true for you, that he says that you're a light, but you've kind of struggled and you've lived like that's not true, tonight will you start to be what you're called by Jesus? I heard a story recently. I was listening to a podcast, and this guy was sharing about, it's like a stupid podcast. They were talking about really stupid stuff, and then all of a sudden they got real serious, and he was like sharing about his dad who worked for the government, I guess, and he was back on the island of Iwo Jima. And that's where a massive battle was fought in the year 1945, and a lot of American soldiers died. And so he was going back to the island. I guess there's one day a year that Americans are allowed to walk that island. It's really small. And he was there, and he was walking the island, and he saw this older woman, like very old, and she was kind of struggling to get around the island, kind of like just having a hard time. And he kind of went up to her, and he's like, ma'am, do you need help? And she was like, no, I'm okay. And he was kind of like, well, what are you doing here? And she told him that she had, she's like in her 80s at this point, and her whole life she had been thinking about coming here because she wanted to walk the steps where her fiance died when he was 19 years old in the war. And so for 60 plus years, she had not gone back to the island and had regretted it day after day, year after year, and finally brought herself to walking and taking those steps. And I thought, when I heard that last week, I was like, man, what I don't want for any of us is to be in our 80s and look back at the last 60 years and think about all the days and the years that we regretted not doing what God has called us to do. That we look back and at the 60 years and we see all the opportunities that we could have been a light for Jesus, but we said, I'm going to step back. I'm not going to step into it. I'm going to step back. I don't want that for any of us. I don't want that for my life, for your life. Man, so would you let tonight be the night that you actually take those steps to either accept that light or to be that light? Would you bow your heads with me? God, I thank you for just the simple truth of the gospel, that you would come and take our place and die on the cross, and for all of our sins, for all of our mistakes, for past